Hi everyone, welcome back to Creator in Conversation. Owen Macaulay here. I'm really excited about today's episode with John Siuntres. John is a renowned podcaster. For the past 2 decades, he has interviewed virtually every renowned comic creator there is within the field. He is the host of the Word Balloon podcast, now entering into its 20th year. If you enjoy what you hear in today's episode, please do consider checking out John's podcast, Word Balloon. It's available wherever you get podcasts. It's completely free and it's a magnificent archive of some of the best that the comics industry has to offer. I first got to know John when he interviewed the great Elliot S. Maggin a number of years ago, and John was really the first podcaster that I began to follow online, and you'll begin to appreciate why I and so many hold him in such high esteem when you listen to today's episode. What really defines John and helps him stand out above all else is perhaps his mastery of the conversation and his professionalism, which is no surprise given his background as a CBS broadcaster, radio host and a sports reporter as well. You'll find out more about this from John directly. And again, you can follow the Word Balloon podcast wherever you get podcasts. John also has a Patreon page which you can consider supporting as well, because I think we'll all appreciate the quality of content that you get from John is absolutely supreme. So if you can, visit Patreon and look up Word Balloon as well. And check out Word Balloon and enjoy today's episode. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, so I pressed the record button and we haven't collapsed yet, so that's always a good sign. And welcome everyone to the next episode of Creating Conversation. Joining us today from Chicago is renowned podcaster John Siuntres of the Word Balloon podcast. How are you today, John?
Doing great, Owen. As always, I appreciate your patronage, your attention, and when you come on, and I'm always happy to share with the American audience your fantastic guests and lectures that you provide at the school.
I know, really appreciate it, and it's when I was starting this, decide on this into a podcast. I definitely had you like on the list of names. Definitely have to be on. John, you were definitely there. I think you were probably like one of the first. I was trying to figure out the scheduling behind it. But the reason I want to talk to you is because the idea of podcasting now, particularly in the comic sphere, has changed so much. It continues to evolve. But in particular, comic books, when you think of them, they're such a visual medium. Yet the Word Balloon is entering into its 20th year this year, is it? And congratulations onto that. How has it been then for you when you initially began the podcast in an audio medium, trying to cover something which was visual? And of course, you have prior experience in sports as well, so obviously that descriptiveness must have been a huge benefit to you. But what has that been like, working in an audio medium covering a visual medium?
Well, when I started, man, and it really does show the advancements in digital technology in the last 20 years. Video was still kind of in its infancy. And my God, we were still using real players as far as playing back audio. And I forget what the Apple original application was for sound. But, real crude stuff, and also using phone lines to connect to make interviews. So, yeah, the reason why I stuck with video or rather audio initially was I was thinking I would use these interviews as a springboard to other broadcast jobs. At that point, I had been in Chicago radio for, over 20 years here, and was between jobs. And I'm like, well, maybe if I do this, it will lead to other broadcast jobs. And then it just kind of became its own thing. I really started only doing video consistently around COVID because we were all shut in. And I had made some videos here and there. And certainly Zoom was up and running, so that was not a big deal. But I just figured, well, we're all bored out of our minds. Let me add a live component to the show rather than pre-recording and putting it out that way. And, do almost what we're doing here in this lecture and have, almost like a virtual convention panel, and allow my listeners and viewers to chime in and ask questions. So it's been fun. And I've been doing video consistently since the start of COVID. And yeah, so it's live first and now it's audio second. But yeah, it never bothered me in terms of just using audio purely to discuss this video medium because, or I should say visual medium, because, obviously the people that are listening were already fans. They probably had their books and we could talk about it that way. So it's funny, because it is my 20th anniversary, I've been going back and looking at old interviews to repurpose, even if it is just audio, and make short videos. And God, I don't know what's happening in Ireland and TikTok, but we're on the verge of having the U.S. ban TikTok, which is, just crazy. But sadly, that's part of the crazy politics that we are unfortunately having to deal with here in the States. But sorry, long answer, but lot there to unpack for all.
No, it's all gold. And in particular, you mentioned about the show going live. When I first began listening as well, like the So Long Word Be Known was a pre-record, like the episode would drop. So has the live component, has that evolved or changed your approach to the show? Or has it just always been like incorporating the audience? How have you found that? Because you're basically like a one-man band, which is fantastic. You're doing all. So there are other shows who might have moderators and such, but you're literally like keeping it rolling, and it's flawless. Like it runs the genuine conversations that you have. It's so organic and informative. And part of the reason as well I really want to have a conversation with you is your background as well in journalism, because do you feel there's something in the craft of conversation that might have been evolving or rather devolving possibly? Because as you mentioned, the technology is so widely available now. I hold up my hands because I'm starting to step into the foray. But for you can tell that there's a kind of a flow, an organization to the shows that you do. But at the same time, I get a sense that it's also an organic conversation that you're having. So like, do you go in with show notes, or is this something which has just become a rhythm to you from like the years of doing the show as well? How have you found that, and has the live component, has that evolved or changed the show?
Well, I appreciate your description because it is kind of a rhythm. And having done broadcast radio, I was a sports radio host and producer for many years prior to starting, for about 15 years before starting Word Balloon in 2005. And so I have had an ability to interview and also compartmentalize my, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking X, and kind of keep my demeanor professional, but also conversational. And thankfully, working in sports radio, it was a talk show. So we were really very much like the corner bar atmosphere, the pub, hanging out and talking about sports and really letting our hair down and really being casual, but having a base of questions to fall back on. But, loving comics and the guests that I do, initially I would have notes, but I do want I want the conversation to be organic. I always worry for people that are starting out, and also group podcasts where host, X says, "Hey, how'd you break into comics?" The answer is, well, I was just finishing my 10-year sentence for armed robbery, and I decided I would try to do something straight, and I always like to draw. And then host 2 goes, "So who's your favorite superhero?" And it's like, no, wait a minute. You got to ask, what's this deal about being in jail for 10 years? I want to hear about that before we get to the next thing. And sometimes that'll happen with other hosts. So I think it's harder to coordinate with a group if you're going to have guests. And I like the dialogue thing. I've always appreciated them. And my God, not only do I listen to Chicago radio and as much national radio, but I really appreciate the BBC and other English-speaking countries over the world, because I just do. I think there's so much to get out of a dialogue and also a one-on-one dialogue. I don't like having a writer and an artist together because I feel like I'm going to shortchange one of them. And also coming from a writer background as I did through my my own degree in journalism, I felt more comfortable initially talking to writers. But thankfully, so many great people who have become good acquaintances in comics have really educated me to really down to even panel design what they, where the eye naturally drops when you're looking at a comic panel and things. Rags Morales gave me this great tutorial about that. And yeah, so I'm really fortunate that way. And I am getting I'm kind of forcing myself to do more artist interviews to get better on that side. But yeah, writers, like you said, I mean, yeah, I really had at that point, 20 years of sports interviews and things. So I was, and also with big athletes being in a major market here in Chicago, Michael Jordan and Sammy Sosa, some of the big, Walter Payton really became a good friend before he passed away. Dick Butkus, Bob Uecker, a great baseball broadcaster here in the States. He's in those, I don't know, and again, guys, I don't know how much you watch American sport movies, but the major league movies, the baseball movies, he was the announcer in those, and one of the greatest guys in the world. He made it to 90 and just such a down-to-earth guy. And I mean, really, I've been very lucky that way in all areas of media and now comics as well, that I feel like I'm, Forrest Gump meeting all these great people and having the opportunity to interview them and stuff. It's great.
Have you noticed many parallels between coverage in sports and coverage in comics? Because what kind of dawned on me, and I can't claim credit for this, is actually my friend Com Hughes who mentioned this, and that sometimes people will tease, oh, you read comic books. And I think a lot of that stigma is gone with the advent of like Marvel Studios. Yet, in a nerdy way, people who read comics might be able to cite, a particular issue or a particular character. But then the sport equivalent would be many people would be able to say like the sports statistics for a particular play. It's like the same. It's the exact same brain chemistry, just different topics. Have you noticed any parallels in like coverage in both fields that like, hey, this group seems to resonate in the same manner as this group would?
Many, many parallels. In fact, the kind of rivalry you'll get, no matter what the sport is, you've got those DC people and those Marvel, the Marvel zombies, as we call them, and really, and it's, and I don't care. I am not, I mean, I grew up more of a DC reader, as a very small kid, but before I was 10 years old, I started reading Marvel as well. And, so for me, it was no big deal, but no, you're absolutely right. And, yeah, to literally the statistics and, I always fear that some of my friends want to listen to my show, and I'll have a particular writer, and we'll talk about like a specific story arc. And, I mean, I try to keep it as, broadly interesting to anyone who might pop in as possible. But I know there's a lot of the phrase here, inside baseball. I don't know what the phrase is for football for you guys when, things get too technical. And if you're not a football fan and they're like, yeah, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. In the pitch when whatever happens, and it's like, yeah, and even that's my limit to football speak. So Ted Lasso, the comedy, has been educating me more on football. But no, it is interesting. And the other thing too is when I started, Image was around, and some of these smaller publishers were around, but the game has changed so much in the comics field, and I'm thrilled about that because a lot of us, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but secondary publishers like Vault and, Aftershock before they had their financial troubles. And, God, I think Mad Cave right now is doing an excellent job. And all these, like, again, non-DC and Marvel titles are finding their audience and finding their place, I think, on the comic book shelf. And then further, crowdfunding has just, erupted. And that has been fascinating to watch. And so many people are really getting their books out there without the aid of a publisher. And that's wonderful. And truly, man, even what you're doing with your school and the comics you guys are publishing and stuff, fantastic. Very, very interesting to observe.
No, really appreciate it. And it has been interesting. Sometimes I'm back and forth when I'm working on a project thinking, I was born the wrong decade, because it feels like opportunities might be different. But then at the same time, I'm thinking, well, if I was doing this a few decades earlier, would I had the resources to even put pages together? It's kind of crazy. It's like often, as they say, a two-edged sword. And it's kind of like how radio is and more popular than ever. And you mentioned how, particularly about TikTok and that's mainly like short video content. And it's not just that, it's on YouTube as well, and Instagram Reels. And you're looking at, you try to get down to 90 seconds, 30 seconds. Yet podcasts, what's interesting is seem to go for an hour, maybe two, maybe three. And substantial audiences are coming to stay and listening to engage. Exactly. But what do you think is the connection there, but behind it, that when it's something about the audience about to engage to what could be a narrative, they just want a quick like punchline. But then with a podcast, it seems to be, well, it's again that conversational sense of community coming into it. Is it? Do you think it's the manner in which people are commuting more now, or is it just the nature of work from home? I know in the show you've mentioned some of your listeners would say to you they do data in, and then you'll be the unseen colleague with them in the office as they're doing the work. But is there anything that you feel as a broadcaster, when you're putting your content out there, that why the long conversations seem to be resonating with people the most in podcast form, whereas people seem to be going towards video for 30 seconds?
Well, I think they are. There are two ways to look at, or three ways, I guess, to look at it. As far as the long form, I think people do. We want to connect, and thank God with the internet, we can connect even more. You and I have become friends without actually physically being in the same space for the last 7 years. I mean, my God, when we met in like 2018 in New York.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. But yeah, the wonderful feedback I get from my audience is, as you say, not only data entry, but yet painters or janitors or whatever. And it's like, man, thank God you're in my ears, having a conversation, because otherwise I'd be getting bored, going bored and everything. But as far as the short content, I see it two ways. One, there are those people that they only do want a minute. That's fine. The other way I look at it is almost a fishing metaphor, where it's a lure to the longer form stuff. And I've been trying to end a lot of my short videos with a title card saying, hey, if you want the rest of the conversation, go to Word Balloon's, in this case, YouTube channel, because of the video component. And so, it's been, I've seen the difference. I've seen new subscribers to my YouTube channel. And it's, as we said, we were talking about TikTok. I think because I am a middle-aged man, if not a early senior citizen, I just turned 60. But I'm like, and nobody wants to see me in a leotard holding up an energy drink. And that's kind of my my Instagram, TikTok kind of view of, and I know that obviously people are much more creative than that, but it's just like, you don't need my face on TikTok. That's okay. But I do believe in the content. I've put stuff on TikTok. I never really got that big of a response. So I am kind of on your parents' platforms of Facebook, Instagram, X. I mean, God, yeah. Thanks, Elon. Thanks for running Twitter, Elon. Jesus. I mean, and forgive this slight word there, but it used to be a much cooler place, and it really is a cesspool. But I stay there because that was the majority of my social media. That's the biggest audience that I had online as far as social media. So I stay. I've gone to Blue Sky as an alternative.
Yeah,
it's interesting though. Yeah.
Yeah, it like the social media, the way it's divided up, it's so interesting because there's an age demographic, as you kind of touched upon, where Facebook might be for a more mature audience, but at the same time, Facebook is great for online sales. So it's like a storefront, and it's more familial, so like families connecting. Instagram gets that great sense of branding, and X, which I think Blue Sky is evolving into, seems to be the networking colleague to colleague connection then too. So each one kind of has its own dimension and changing, but with social media, and we've kind of touched upon it, like the sense of communities and groups and rivalries, like these sports teams, be it Marvel versus DC, but then also with social media, as you can see, there can be many heated opinions, debates, sometimes not in the best spirited of ways. It just evolves into chaos. What's always stood out to me with the Word Balloon podcast, and we've had this when we've spoken off the air among ourselves, that I always found that when delivering, if you're doing a review or a critique of a film, a show, or a book, it's always constructive. And whenever you host someone, you do recognize that you are a host. So you've invited someone, and there's always that element of collegiality that might be present. And you've always done a great job of, if there's somebody who you'd be interviewing, and it might, like, it might not be your particular favorite, whatever X, you still always don't let that interfere with the point coming across. And how is that for you? Like the people here who be listening who might be thinking, well, I'm tying with the idea of doing a podcast, or they're looking forward to being interviewed on a podcast themselves. They have a book or something to promote. What would be your advice to those who are trying to get out there without turn something into a shouting match, or to exercise, let's say, too strongly an opinion in a certain way? Where do you think the balancing act for that might lie? Or is there any process that you engage or use from your years in broadcasting to achieve that?
Well, again, coming from sports radio, we would deal with random call-ins of people that were, sell the whole team. I hate this guy. Get rid of him. And it's like, all right, but let's talk normally. But when you have a guest on, I really believe, and I'm sure I've told you this before, and the operative word is guest. You don't invite somebody into your living room to go, hey, you know why you suck? I mean, it's just not right. It's not proper. And I'm like, okay, and also myself, as opposed to doing critiques of things that I don't like, I do try to be constructive when I do find something I don't like. Owen has certainly heard me complain about Star Trek and its current iteration and my frustrations with that. But I do try to come from it from a very fair standpoint and optimistic. I can't deny that there are a lot of shows out there that absolutely attract people that are happy to hear the anger and the vitriol and the bad critiques, and they almost look for it. I'm just not built that way personally. And I really think there's more value to having a calm conversation, and especially with a guest, where, I mean, even some of my friends who have done comic book stories that were unsuccessful, a Marvel comic book event that didn't do well. I remember Fear Itself was a Matt Fraction event. And I'm like, Matt, and I really kind of was like, what do you think happened? Obviously, the audience really didn't stick with you on this story. What do you think happened? And it was funny because I think initially Matt's like, hey, you take it easy on me. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I mean, we all swing for the fences when we make anything, and we want it to be great. Sometimes it just doesn't connect with an audience. And I really do appreciate that occasional guest that is willing to go through an unsuccessful attempt. And what do you think went wrong? And whatever. Because ultimately, every time, hey, I was just trying to tell a cool story. I remember when Rick Remender killed the Punisher for a minute, and he was Frankencastle, and he sent him down in the sewers, and he was dealing with all of Marvel's Legion of Monster characters and stuff. People hated it. Or when they turned Hail Hydra, the Captain America Nick Spencer story. Oh my God. And also, there are some people that do take this stuff a little too seriously. Oh, you robbed my childhood. How dare you do that to Steve Rogers? And it's like, he's going to be fine. I promise you, by the end of the story, they're going to return him back to his original state, and it's just going to be another story, and we're going to move on. So that kind of stuff I laugh at. But I do think that the podcast host has a responsibility when it comes to guests to have a safe environment. You can ask tough questions, but think about it and think about a way of asking them in a polite way, because you want an answer. Pete Rose, a baseball player who bet on baseball and was banned for the game for the rest of his life, was allowed special dispensation when they had an all-star game, and they invited, it was in 1999, so they had an all-century team, and they invited him back on the field. And this American broadcaster I know had the opportunity to talk to him, and he's like, don't you think you owe your fans an apology for your years of gambling and stuff? And he goes, I'm here for a positive event. I'm really not interested in answering that. And a couple months later, I was at a boxing match and with a group of broadcasters and print journalists and that guy. And everyone's like, hey, man, what were you doing hassling Pete Rose? And he goes, it was great television. I said, no, great television is getting an answer to a tough question. All you got was a how dare you. I'm like, sorry, Jim, that's the facts. And all he's like, yeah, Johnny's right. Absolutely, man. What's wrong with you? And the best was a month later, he was doing a Mike Tyson fight. And this is after Tyson had already been convicted, but also served his time and released. So he's back in his career. And Jim was interviewing Mike in the ring after a fight. Mike immediately goes, yeah, I just want to say it was very disrespectful for the way you treated Pete Rose at the All-Star game. And I'm like, the convicted rapist is admonishing your behavior. What does that tell you about the way you're purporting yourself? I'm sorry, man. I mean, it's just that's the way I see it.
Oh no, and it's so easy in this day and age for the armchair critic now to have more of a voice than anything, because I think we've always, throughout time, everyone would look at sporting events, film, any type of project. No, I could do that better. Or why didn't they do this? But now everyone has the megaphone to go with it,
That's
as well, and that can be daunting then when you have aspiring creators. They're like, oh, well, what would the backlash be? And some content creators as well who deliberately then don't put their name or face out there as well when producing that content. So that's the other thing that comes with it. So, and for yourself, John, with years now of like being a broadcaster and producing the podcast, have you found it change your relationship to the podcasts you listen to, or is it just enriched your experience all that more engaging? Like, so what would be in your time, your downtime? Are you still like an avid podcast listener as well? You mentioned some of the BBC. Have you checked out Big Finish as well? Yes, yeah.
Oh my God, yeah, man. I've been trying to get Nicholas from Big Finish to come on the show because some of the comic book writers have he's reached out to them as potential script writers for things, and I'm like, hey, connect me with Nick because I really love what he does with Big Finish. That's amazing. But I do listen. I don't listen to a lot of comic book interview podcasts because I don't want to be influenced by their questions, and there are a lot of good ones. But also, much like any broadcasting, there's a lot of bad ones, and certainly on not only audio but also video as well. And yeah, like you said, everyone has a megaphone there. Yeah, and unfortunately, I think their inability beyond anger comes through. So I don't have a lot of time for those kind of, just hate-filled podcasts. And I'm much more interested in the intimate conversations. And as I say, not only the BBC Radio, but National Public Radio here in America, wonderful show called Fresh Air. That's out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Terry Gross is the host of that. And again, just intimate conversation and without commercial breaks. And coming from commercial radio where you had to do an interview within 6 minutes or maybe even 12, there likely be a break in between and, we got to move on to something else. And I'm like, no, man, let's sit down. I always give the hypothetical of George Lucas letting you know, hey, listen, I'd be happy to be on your show, and you got me for as long as you need. If you want to do 2 hours, we can do 2 hours. And what I always hear from podcast experts and even radio experts, well, really, a podcast should only be about a half hour or 40 minutes because it should be the time of commuting from point A to point B, and you really don't want to go longer than that. Well, BS. I mean, and again, it's like, no, man, are you nuts? If you're a Star Wars fan and George Lucas wants to talk to you for 2 hours, sit down, George. We're going to talk for 2 hours. Absolutely, man. And Owen knows. I mean, I will do marathon talks with friends like Brian Bendis and Mark Waid. I just had on Wednesday. We spoke for 90 minutes. And yeah, it's like, let's have an organic conversation as long as it needs to be. If it goes longer than that, fine. Some people are kind of brief with their responses. All right, well, I guess we're going to be done in a half hour. That's fine. I don't like when the great Roy Thomas of Marvel Comics, wonderful writer and editor, and DC as well. The first couple times when I would approach him, he'd be like, well, I can give you 10 minutes. I'm like, no, you got the wrong show, man. I'm like, you've had a 40-year career. I have to talk to you more than 10 minutes. So, yeah, but it's, again, having done it as long as I have with experience and stuff, I know how long it needs to be, and I don't worry about those other things that others may as they're starting out.
Absolutely. And with again, Woodbloom's in its 20th year now, and you've been a lifelong comic book fan. And just at this point, recording the news earlier this week has come out that Diamond has got declared bankruptcy. And for so long, Diamond was one of the main, if not the only distributor within the comic industry. That changed with COVID. And it's a big shake-up. Now, what's, again, brilliant about the Woodbloom podcast is you've had many editors and creators from the Bronze Age, from the 90s and the early 90s coming in, and they've spoken about events like the DC Bloodbath, which was when the first one where it was like big, I think heavy snowfall in the 70s led to many people just losing the print, the Bronze Age, like the books being released on time, and it led to a series of cancellations. And then there was another one recently with COVID, with pencils down, huge transformations in the industry. And then you have events like, as you mentioned, like Image Comics on the rise, and then certain companies folding in, like Skybound now seems to be so popular within the Image.
Absolutely.
And now this Diamond situation seems to be another seismic shift that seems to be happening as well. First of all, I suppose, any comments or insight, opinions on the Diamond situation, and just in retrospect then of what you've covered, like you've probably seen a couple of these seismic changes. Any really kind of stand out to you that you often think about that was a big move the needle moment on?
Well, certainly crowdfunding, as I said, starting around 15 years ago, was a major shift and has only increased. Kickstarter was the only game in town for crowdfunding initially. You have GoFundMe now, you have Zoop, you have these other crowdfunding options. So that's interesting. But as you say, Diamond, and I mean literally going back as a reader, I remember the pre-Diamond Monopoly years when we had Capital City here in the Midwest and was a competing distributor with Diamond. And then Diamond became the only game in town. And I mean no disrespect to Steve Geppy and the others in Diamond management, but I have to be honest and say this was a mom and pop organization that grew but didn't evolve with the times. I was fortunate enough to go to a couple Diamond Summit meetings about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and just be a fly on the wall and hear comic book stores interface with Diamond, voice their complaints, and also interface with publishers. And it was a real education. And I'm sorry, Diamond reminded me of a very local warehouse distributor kind of operation. And it's like, guys, you are dealing with international clients that aren't getting served properly. And yeah, it was obvious to me. So even, first of all, I always did kind of find it a little ugly that they were the only game in town, and also kind of used it to their advantage. I wasn't for that. So as uncomfortable and awkward and scary as things initially got, as you said, during the pencils down era of the beginning of COVID, and Diamond had to shut down for at least like 6 weeks of distribution. Well, if your books can't get out, obviously the publishers shouldn't put out more product. So it really was this terrible domino effect. They protected themselves, and that's when Lunar and some of these other alternatives have popped up. And the type of bankruptcy that Diamond is dealing with is Chapter 11, which is more reorganization rather than liquidation, which is Chapter 7. And but that said, I think the writing is on the wall, and I think the good news is it's going to be tough. And in fact, I intend to talk to one of my buddies who's a store owner and see how he's going to react. But as far as the publishers, I think they're going to be fine. And there are alternative publishing, distributing arms that they can go through. And in fact, occasionally I've talked to Rich Johnson of Bleeding Cool to see how the UK is handling these things. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see how it develops, and I'll certainly follow through with that. But I can't deny a bit of, well, if you were a better run business, you may not be facing this situation. And I think that Diamond caused a lot of their own problems.
And it is interesting, like you mentioned, like just even the word business, that people, sometimes underestimate when producing any type of comic book content it's business now. You're producing, overseeing the publishing, you have your shipping deadlines, you have your production deadlines. I forget who it was on the podcast you interviewed, but they were speaking about fulfilling their Kickstarter orders, and they would buy lunch for the post office because they would be bringing down all the packages for them, and like that would take a good chunk of time, which I've discovered myself. I recently just shipped yesterday the annuals we did, and the people were not happy. The post office staff, lovely. The people behind me in the queue, they weren't happy with the shipping. But just stuff like that, that's something you have to factor in.
Jimmy Palmiotti, who's really he is not only for himself figured out the best crowdfunding game and getting books to people and stuff, but has really become kind of a guru, an expert for others that are doing it. And a lot of them will contact Jimmy and go, all right, how do I do this? you've got it down to a science. But yeah, he was the guy that because he just knew, all right, I'm coming with, 50 pieces of, probably even more a day to the post office, and let them know I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a civil service that they have to offer, but that said, hey, I'm making more work for you today. I feel bad. Let me buy you guys lunch. And they do. They appreciate it. And I even saw that in broadcasting in a different way, where we would be bought lunch because, from sponsors and things. And it's like, hey, you're getting the word out there from our product. Let us say thank you and buy you lunch today. Things like that. So no, that's the kind of like small thing regarding crowdfunding that a creator should know, because, like it or not, yeah, that they're the ones that are getting your product to the people that bought into your Kickstarter and everything. So yeah, try and find a way to thank them for their end of the distribution deal.
And I always appreciate it in the coverage in Word Balloon that you've mentioned, like you've had great conversations with Bendis, the Bendis tapes. You have Tom King as well with the King speech, and that's always been really interesting, because I remember Tom King's first episode with you, which was a phenomenal episode, because Tom was talking about his experience in panic attacks as a creator, and then he also went on to discuss, and every time he's on, he seems to be referring how like writing comics is a blue collar job. Like, it's not just, sometimes people think it's, I wear my silk scarf and go out into the fields and be inspired and come back. But it's like, no, you gotta sit down, do the work, 9 to 5, and that's, from your point of view, that must be like a kind of a wow moment, because Word Balloon has kind of shifted. Now, even Declan Shelby here in Ireland has mentioned how he would listen to you when he was in college. So you've kind of been there for like a couple of people who come back, and Tom King said the same, where he would listen to you and then come back. That must be like better than any kind of trophy you could win in the biz when people are going back telling you this.
100%, man. No, I don't put myself into best podcast competitions, or I don't worry about that. The feedback I get from listeners is great. I won't deny that there is a special feeling knowing that a creator is like, oh man, when I was in school, I was listening to Word Balloon, and thank God you were talking to these creators that I looked up to, and getting tips on writing or drawing and things, and now they're pros and everything. And yeah, oh no, that's the greatest compliment in the world. And again, it's from sticking around for now 20 years and still doing it and stuff. So no, that obviously something's working, and that means a lot. And I don't have the biggest audience. I'm aware of that, and that's okay, because again, a lot of times people want the hate debate and would much rather hear that. But that doesn't interest me. My feeling from the start was comic book creators deserve the same kind of respect and attention that filmmakers and prose authors, journalists get. And it's like, these guys are making really great stories. Obviously, Hollywood wised up to that within the last, 30 years. And so, that's good. That's great. And then, well, they should, because they've been mining it nonstop since the late 90s. I mean, Blade was 1997, and I always cite that movie as the beginning of the comic book movie period we're in. And there have been minor shifts within that since then. And television as well, my God. And even before streaming, Marvel with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was a over-the-air ABC network show for 6 seasons. And yeah, so they get it. Everybody gets it to a degree. And, as you said earlier, too, sometimes people would be embarrassed about, don't let the other adults see your stack of comics and stuff. And I even had that a bit in sports, and some of the jocks, oh, did you go to the comic book store today? And it like, I don't know how to break it to you, but I like who I am. And I'm really sorry that you obviously seem insecure of who you are because you got to attack. And it's like, sorry, man. And certainly, again, nobody's laughing anymore because the geeks have inherited the earth, if I can misquote the infamous quote and everything. And it's true. I mean, it's like, sorry, man, people like adventure fiction, and comic book stories have filled that void. So yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I know I've trailed from your initial question, but
that's a big segue into it, because like for you, when was the this is mainstream now, moment? Because I think I remember one of the interviews you did with Bendis was when he was called in to see an early cut of Spider-Man. This is like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and he recommendations on punching up dialogue and stuff. But he said he could see Stan being emotional because finally technology had caught up with the fantasy, and that seems to be what moved the needle in regard of being accepted mainstream, was the suspense of this belief. Again, when you talk about like old Star Trek episodes from the original series, that's still an audience who would be, you know, more akin to going to live theater, suspension of disbelief, and like imagination and engaging. Now, in a world of CGI, it has to be put on more passive, put on the screen to see in order to believe. It has to look real. So I think technology has gone a huge way in this. Like Iron Man, for me, I think in Ireland, like I noticed people who never read a comic when I was in school. You know, when I leave school, everyone's mad about like the MCU. But what was your kind of well, this seems to be mainstream. I think Game of Thrones helped a good bit as well for a lot of like fantasy side.
I completely agree with that. Honestly, it's why I started Word Balloon, because I was working in sports radio, and I wanted to generate, I was working more behind the scenes, despite a previous job where I was more in front of the microphone and hosting more. At this point, I was doing radio production, audio production. So I'm like, well, what's a subject I can do that might be interesting and gather an audience, but, won't interfere and seen as a conflict of interest in my broadcast job. So this was 2004, 2005, and it was films like Road to Perdition and Sin City and Batman Begins, and that's why 2005 was kind of when I started Word Balloon. And so that was a big moment for me. But also, as you said earlier, as far as film and television, look at the evolution of CGI and go back to Terminator 2 with that, and in fact, even Star Trek and Deep Space Nine with that liquid morphing kind of initial CGI look, to where we are now, to the point now, again, with the democratization of technology, and that anyone could do it if they've got the money. I'm sure all of you have seen on YouTube some of these fake movie trailers of what would Star Wars have looked like if it was made in the 1950s. And my God, they're incredible. And, they're generating as AI actors that look human. They still move in a robotic fashion, and dialogue isn't there. Everybody knows it'll get there. And certainly there's a fear of that taking jobs away. And I'm in that world as well, where it's like, I am concerned about that. I was a member of the Screen Actors Guild for my radio job because it also had the broadcasting arm as well. But it's funny because from a writing standpoint, people are worried too. And I'm like, yeah, and I think people are going to try, but there's that human element. I remember Brian Azzarello wrote a Superman story where it was really about his conscience, and he was questioning his own faith. And it was a story he did with Jim Lee, and I forget what the story arc was titled.
Or tomorrow.
It was Fordham. Excellent. Yeah, thank you, man. And it's like AI isn't going to come up with that. They're not. I'm sorry. That's where a writer really finds a wrinkle. Same with Batman as well in certain characterizations. You name your favorite character. Or thankfully, certainly there are other characters that haven't had that opportunity to get that deep into their character yet, because, they're still Bronze Age memories and might only have an action scene in like, for instance, Wade is putting some interesting characters in Justice League Unlimited right now, and really reaching back even to the Golden Age. And I'm like, oh God, man, it's great to see Character X. In fact, next week, there's going to be a great Golden Age character that I love. And, he only has a couple of minutes. But I would really love someone to grab that character and do a modern story and say, okay, what is his feeling having been there literally pre-Superman? I mean, this is a very early Action Comics. Action was number one, but I guess maybe he started a detective, which did predate Action Comics by a couple of years. But yeah, again, the technology has made it easier to, and so I think those things have made people more excited about the genre in general, and it has allowed for these movies to realize what could only be initially realized on paper.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like the AI, this is actually, and it's great that you brought it up, because it's actually been a recurring question that has been being addressed in a couple of these episodes now as they go out. And I remember, I think it was like 2 Christmases ago now, we're coming back after the Christmas break in faculty, and I mean, every academic, not just in the college I was working with, not just in the country, but around the world, was freaking out because of AI and ChatGPT and about, oh, how are we going to assess, how are we going to authenticate the work? And these are important matters as well, and there's more framework being created to address them. But the way I've looked at AI to an extent is I have a Superman analogy and I have a Star Trek analogy that I look at them in both ways. The Star Trek one is very much like, this is where we get our holodeck from. This is where we get the programming to have that immersive storytelling. We still need a storyteller there, but this is where I know some people are worrying about the future of cinema, and I think it's important that we need to protect to make sure something doesn't become elitist, where it's like, oh, I can only people from a certain socioeconomic background can now have something that's handmade. The rest is all just, a manufacturing from an AI as such. I think it's important that we protect that. But at the same time, there's new forms of storytelling yet to be explored. And what AI hopefully will become is just another tool. And then the Superman analogy is, as you mentioned, Wade. I don't know if you ever read it, but there was a pitch put together by Grant Morrison, Tom Peyer, Mark Wade, and Mark Miller about Superman. I think it's called Superman 2000. And it was still pitched to do a weekly ongoing Superman series, like Action Superman. And they were going to be like what became, the Spidey Trust in Brand New Day. They were going to do that with Superman about a decade before they did it with Spider-Man. And some of in the mission statement, they never came to pass, but a lot of the content used in it, you would recognize from All-Star Superman or Red Son. You'd see elements of it coming true. But one of the pitches, mission statement, was people saying about Superman being too powerful. And they said, well, if that's the case, what you do is you have galaxies collide then by Mongol, like Alpha Centauri is about to crash into the Milky Way. And that really pushes Superman to his limits. And then with AI, the way I see it is if it's going to, redefine the field we're in, but that's the challenge of the artist then is, but what's the new canvas now? And it's interesting. These are it's heavy stuff because we're weighing up what some of the most greatest philosophers of all time have been human identity and experience. And then I'm just I'm just here for the men, the long john fighting the bad guys,
No, it's true though. You have to think about again, and what I said earlier about Diamond and not really seeing how the business has evolved. That goes for storytellers as well. But I really do think the human element. Again, maybe in 20 years I'll be proven wrong, and we all teasingly call AI Skynet, going back to the Terminator movies and stuff. And yeah, maybe Skynet at that point will be smart enough. There's an old 1970 movie called Colossus: The Forbidden Project, where a supercomputer literally overtakes the world. Fantastic movie, and really more relevant now than it ever was, even with the old, wall computers with the big reel-to-reel tapes on them and stuff. But no, it's great, and it I think it still plays well. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's that human element, and what you're discussing, and also specifically, it's funny, the Superman analogy. All my friends who hear, well, Superman is powerful, too powerful. It's like, yeah, but he still kind of feels like any human, like a human being. And bullets bounce off his chest, but you can break his heart. I mean, I remember Greg Rucka saying that, and it's true. And there's that great moment at the end of the Kingdom Come story where it's Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman having lunch at Planet Krypton, and they're just kind of assessing things after the event. And apparently, Batman's keeping close watch on Luthor. And he goes, yeah, I caught Luthor trying to slip into the Batcave and hack my computer. And he goes, he says hello. And Clark very optimistically goes, really? And Bruce goes, no, because he hates you, dumbass. And I mean, it's that kind of interpersonal dynamic that I think still eludes AI-generated stories. And we need that because those are the moments we remember. Bendis always said that too. There's been a million fights between Iron Man and Dr. Doom. It's the conversations, or Dr. Doom with the Fantastic Four. He hates Reed Richards, but to me, the most interesting dynamic is Victor Von Doom and Ben Grimm, because they went to school together. And, first of all, here's Ben Grimm, that dumb jock. And even with all his powers is the thing, you're still that college jock idiot, sports idiot. And as far as the thing is concerned, it's like, Vic, you were a nerd in college and you're still a nerd, and I have no respect for you, and you're just a jerk. And that cracks me up even more than who's the smarter guy, Reed Richards or Victor Von Doom, because it's that just dismissive on both guys from very different ways of, you are nothing and you're in my way. No, you're in my way. Get the hell out of my way. And that cracks me up when that happens.
Oh, no, no, absolutely. And I think you've seen Superman and Lois, the TV show just concluded.
Yes.
Yep. I've been watching on the BBC. Well, we're yet to get the final season, but everyone and the mother, including the actors in it, have posted what has happened. So I'm more or less seeing what has happened, which is annoying, but at the same time, it is brilliant. Like, that is knock the ball out of the park. And I teach a narrative class, interactive storytelling, for the Leinster School of Music on one of their programs, where essentially people are learning how to compose games, CMPG, compose musical games, but we have to teach them a little bit about narrative and a little bit about, how to make a game so they can understand where they fit into the production cycle. And often what I teach every semester, I stick to the basics, like the hero's journey, Star Wars. I think I've even done it with probably Alistair's here with us. I think probably done it in one of our classes. But with regards to Superman and Lois, I've often adapted that since season 1 in my narrative classes. It was the producers and the writers had a sandbox, which is where a TV show budget, which was even cut forward in the later season, but the quality always remained. And how they did it was they boxed clever with the parameters of the reality and the parameter of the character. And as you mentioned, bullets bounce off him, but he has a human heart. So what do you do with Superman is you make him a parent, because, you can't heat wave your sons, if you're frustrated, you can't punch them into space. So now it's like all his powers are like meaningless in that regard. And then also they found a great narrative sense of, and this is what worked against Smallville, was when they finally made to Metropolis, you could tell it was like a film set they were on, but they had sense to make the narrative to bring them back to Smallville in this, because it made it look more real, more lived in. And that's where really you can tell people who are, a good storytellers, they accept the parameters and the tools of what they have, tell that story, and that's where quality, storytelling comes from. And what sometimes this leads me to an interesting question I want to ask you, John, because I've picked up on this in a couple of episodes of Word Balloon as well, which is the comic book as the art form as well, because you've often expressed how it's in the past, particularly if people hold in reverence some of the Golden Age, as if it's like the Mona Lisa they've made, but at the same time you've often, and rightfully so from a social history point of view, these were like people working, to pay the rent, pay the bills as well. So on one hand, like, not to diminish like what they've made, they've like people like Kirby are just like geniuses, like they're creating whole worlds to begin with. But at the same time, they were just doing this. They didn't think, some of them didn't even live to see what has become of their work today, like these mega blockbusters that are coming out. But whereabouts do you lie these days with, comic book as an art form? Then do you think it's something that's being taken too seriously now that people are losing sight of the entertainment value because it's popularity, or do you think it depends on the project?
Yeah, I think it does depend on the project. And also, I always, and not that you were saying this at all, but it's like you hear from the real mainstream audience, that comic books, they refer to comic book movies, and really they're just talking about superhero movies. And it's like, well, you're forgetting about Persepolis and some of the more personal comic books that have come out. And I mean, it's a medium. It is just like a novel can be slam bang space opera, like a great sci-fi story, or it could be a very personal tome of real events, reportage. I've seen great journalism comic books as well, and I've also seen personal real stories, but also just a good romance and things like that. So it really can be anything, and I think it depends on the story, but also from the audience, my concern is that the publishers and also the movie and TV people, when they buy an option to make something, that the creator is absolutely as involved as they want to be. And if they're not, then they need good lawyer representation or agent representation when signing those contracts. Because even now, well beyond that initial, hey, I can't believe my comic book got optioned by this production company. I have friends who got their books optioned. They never saw a movie or a TV show. And all it did was freeze their ability to make deals with other potential publishers or even animation studios or live action studios. And it's because this, person has an option. A couple of my friends literally just got their rights back to their main original creation just a couple of years ago after having given it up for 15 years. 15 years, So, and you're right. I think a lot of those Golden Age people and certainly Silver Age and even Bronze Age guys didn't live to see what we're seeing right now. A guy who did and thankfully got guilted into being partially taken care of, Len Wein, the creator of Wolverine. Hugh Jackman basically embarrassed Disney at a live event, had Len stand up, and he goes, I would not be on this stage if it wasn't for that man right there. And all of a sudden, Disney cut Len Wein a very, very big check. Jack Kirby and the Kirby estate getting a bit of money, certainly not the money that they deserve. And I'm glad to see that a lot of the younger creators are clear-eyed about that. It even happens in podcasting. I've had the opportunity to, hey, you want to put your show on our network? Well, I still own it, right? Well, then we're not talking because I own Word Balloon. And I've even, no one has taken me up on it, but I even had a major network here in America ask, hey, and through Chicago offices, would you be interested in putting Word Balloon on our network? No, but I'll do a similar show for you. That's exactly the same, and I access to the same guests, and I'll give you the same kind of programming. I still expect a piece of that, though. Yeah, we're done talking. See you later. And it's funny because I even hear comedians and stars, movie stars and television stars, faced with the same thing, and that thankfully there are wiser heads where it's like, yeah, don't make that deal. Don't make that deal. Have faith in what you're doing, and that's a big thing that I tell my friends that are podcasting and just getting into podcasts. It's like, you own this. You're never going to own broadcasting. It's very hard. And again, that's the democratization of the technology. And as many crappy shows and shows that I'm not crazy about and mean shows, this is also an opportunity for serious people to make something and own it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the IP, just ask George Lucas. They said take whatever you want to the box office, but I own Star Wars, and that.
Well, and thankfully, George, being in his senior years and stuff, can take the $1 billion payday, and all right, that's enough. Whatever. And, certainly doesn't have the strength that he did, back in the 70s when he was making the first Star Wars movie. But, and again, without any personal judgment, I mean, the audience speaks for itself. Disney has not been the greatest caretaker of Star Wars. Television and film have had their hits and misses with the DC universe. We're seeing it in phase 4 and 5 in Marvel. That, oh man, the streak that 10-year streak from Iron Man to Avengers Endgame, there's been a lot of stutters and missteps that haven't resonated with the audience and stuff. So no, you really do need, and that's even Marvel people. Like, I think Kevin Feige in general does understand what makes good movies tick. I think James Gunn is going to do it with DC. I'm very encouraged by Creature Commandos, the cartoon, and that initial Superman trailer. And also, as much as, and forgive me because slight editorial, as much as I respect, I believe in representation. I believe in inclusion. Very, very much so. But when it comes to the expense of interesting story and plausible story, I think that's a problem. And I think it is something that a lot of these companies have struggled about, where, oh, look at, isn't this great? We got people of color. We have people of different orientation. We have strong women. Great, but you need to make sure beyond that they're there and seen, which I do think is important. These characters need a reason beyond their basic demographics. And I really think that a lot, I say that all the time about Star Trek, one of the leads of Star Trek Discovery. Wasn't that great? We're focusing on a young woman of color as the lead. Great. What else does she do? Well, she's always the solution. I mean, Rey in Star Wars. I'm sorry. Jesus, Luke had to do a hell of a lot. I mean, Ray comes out of the desert, finds the Millennium Falcon, and is flying it. And it's like, well, that certainly seemed easy. I don't know, man. I think you need a little more experience, but that's just me. And again, it's nothing against it being a woman. My God, Jennifer Garner on Alias. I'm like, this is one of the best shows I've ever seen. She was fantastic as the lead. Star Trek Voyager. All the women on. I mean, I just, as you know, and I just talked to not a visitor from Deep Space Nine, the first officer of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine show. One of my favorite actors of Star Trek of all time. And fantastic that she was given such a challenging character. You got to write the character. You got to make these people interesting. We need a reason to show up beyond the fact of, here's a person of different orientation just like me. I see myself on screen. That's great. But I hope you want more than just, hey, I'm here. Because a lot of it is to me, hey, I'm here. Well, that's great. What do you do? Oh, but I'm here. Yeah, but, give me more. There's just a misunderstanding and mismanagement, I think, on the IP holders. They don't get it. They're getting it now. And in fact, the Daredevil, I think, trailer that just came out is looks like a step in the right direction. Let's hope so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in particular, touching upon everything there, I even more so than any kind of what are we doing, like in terms of like the seeing oneself in the art form, I relate it to that being the characters being aspirational versus relatability as well, and that sometimes people feel, let's just take Batman's wealth for example. A lot has been spoken around how could there be such a thing as an ethical billionaire and such, could someone have such fabulous wealth as Batman and still be the good guy? And we kind of lose focus then. Oh yeah, but it's also a work of fiction. So I'll be like going back to like King Arthur going, oh, so Galahad, could he really be that loyal? And it's really curious. The late great Kevin Conroy, he really said something about the character Batman, which is about his nobility and that he doesn't want anyone to know who he was. And sometimes people see that as a way of, because he's he's put on a mask, beating up the underprivileged. But at the same time, it's like, no, it's this is someone who could just quit tomorrow and be set for life and wouldn't have to put up any degree, but still comes back to it day in, day out. And that's the aspirational aspect, which is like, we can put a cape around our necks and jump out the window and fly like Superman, but we can still, embody the core elements of the character, which is the decency, the kindness, and that's some of the most relatable stories. Whether Joseph Campbell was right or wrong in saying about the monomyth, that if you take every different story from King Arthur to ancient Rome, and you could see recording beats, whether that was an over exaggeration or not, the one thing you can't contest is there's something to the hero's journey. You mentioned about Rey, and if you look at it in comparison to the original Star Wars, Luke and Vader don't face off until the second film face to face, really, and even then Luke loses, and that leads to the third arc. In the Force Awakens, Rey's already faced off against the big bad Darth Vader against one. So it's nothing to do with characters; it's to do with the story, and that you need to kind of follow those beats, I suppose.
The journey.
Yeah. Exactly, that's it, and that's where we relate to characters. Then it is in the journey, because we all overcome those difficulties.
Yeah, and you got to show them fail and learn. And I think that's an important part of the story. They can't just show up and be the solution to everything, because that's boring, and it's not real, and it's not interesting. And again, because I know people have been using girl boss as a pejorative, and I know it's like, again, it's like, because they show up and I'm here, and it's like, yeah, but again, it's Smallville, as you mentioned, and even Superman and Lois. It's, God, I'm new in Smallville. Hey, I'm new to this, and I don't know what I'm doing, and and I'm learning as I'm going. And in Superman and Lois, well, I never had to deal with being a parent before, and and you're right. I mean, and that's where the interesting story comes from. They need to struggle, and that has been my complaint with the DEI of, well, we're here, we're represented. Yeah, that's great, but I want to see you, and also I want to see you contribute. because some have also just been stuck in struggle mode. And it's like, and I could say that about certain characters of new Star Trek. And it's like, it's great that you are represented. It really is. But you've got to show that I mean, especially in a situation where you've got supposedly a crew that has been put together by an organization to accomplish things. Well, what is your value to the crew? And really, I don't believe you were hired just because you are a woman or a person of different orientation, or a person of color. No, you're bringing something to the table. You got to show that. That's how 80s and 90s Star Trek leapt beyond the Captain Kirk saves the day and occasionally Mr. Spock will save the day. That's it in the old 60s show. And also that everything was focused on the problem of the week rather than the characters that were coming back every week. And it was Michael Piller, the fantastic writer of Star Trek, that's like, no, we got 7 regular cast members. Let's make it a Worf story this week. Let's make it a Data story, a Troy story, or a Dr. Crusher story. And it's like, yeah, that's what you got to do. And in Star Trek Discovery, Michael Burnham is the be-all, end-all of everything. And everyone else around her is, well, gee, I hope Michael gets us out of this. Well, I'm sorry, what the hell are you doing on the ship? Do something. I mean, my God, you're the engineer. Come up with a solution. And again, write these characters beyond your lead to have these solutions. And I think a lot of that is budgetary, and then they don't want to pay people too much and give them too many lines. So you've got a lot of, we used to call them extras, and that wasn't a good phrase anymore. So now they're background actors, and they literally are just, what were the extras and everything. But beyond that, well, if you only have 5 lines of dialogue, we could save money, and we only have to pay X amount of money. Well, now you're left with a bunch of statues that are up there that all they do either look at each other scared or have very few lines and very few contributions to the story. That's bad writing, and something has to be done about that, or you're just going to get your audience angry.
I've got to confess to something here. Here's a hack fan who enjoys. Now, if you enjoy good detective shows, you need to stop listening and skip ahead now, right? Because I'm going to say maybe on good mysteries or something in the next while, but there was a show, I cancelled now, but I didn't watch. My family did, called Prodigal Son, where I think it was like Martin Sheen, and he was a serial killer, and he had a son, and the son was worried about whether he's like a forensic guy, a detective, but he's worried he might too become a serial killer like his father had those instincts. And as you mentioned, if a background character talks, I know because a friend of mine also did it, they literally just held open the door in a film or something and said, thank you. They got like $5,000 or something thrown at them, like serious check, for a budding actor. An episode of this is on Prodigal Son in the background, and there's a guy who's putting down carpet on the stage, and he says something. He goes, "Excuse me," and I went, "He's the killer." And my friend looked, "What are you on about?" And goes, "He's just the back." He's the killer. They didn't just pay $5,000 for the background guy to say thank you. Lo and behold, the whole episode leading up to this perfect person framed. And then what happens is, last minute, the flashback to the guy put the carpet down. And I'm just like, that's so every time you go back now and you watch a TV show, if they introduce the killer as any background character, someone who you just forget momentarily. If they say just one word, that's the killer. And that's really, once you see that, it kind of does bring victims a little bit when you go back and watch it. But I suppose the core to it is, and this is like something that for many of your guests on your show, and anyone who works in the industry, and any teacher I know as well, would always say, whatever you do, the story you tell, it's yours to tell. But the actions you take within the story, the events, has to be in service to the story, like causality. I think we were saying just before the recording, you mentioned you were just recently interviewed Mark Wade. Well, during lockdown, I sat in on a class he was delivering during COVID, and people are asking advice, and one of the pieces he was saying is what he likes to do, and I think Bendis might be the same as well, which is you put your character in the worst position you can possibly imagine, because that creates the tension and the anticipation of how they're going to get out of it. Even the old 60s Batman show did it. You knew he's going to get out of the death trap, but you had like the next episode to wait. But also, and I think this might have been what Bendis might have said, or could be Wade as well, it also reveals the true character of your character, because when, like, look at Daredevil Born Again, like the Miller story, when he's stripped of everything, like when it's his reputation, his very identity is taken from him, he still comes back, and there's something very like the underdog that appeals, and Somewhere along the way, it's people kind of got a little scared of putting the characters through the ringer like that. But it's like it's okay. You're like they're gonna triumph, but you gotta bring them down to bring them high again.
And
And
I am republishing some interviews I did with cast members and writers of Battlestar Galactica, and the new one, and Aaron Douglas, who played the chief the chief, the guy who ran the ground crew for the fighter planes and our fighter spaceships. And he's like, man, the writers just put the chief through the ringer, and every time the audience is like, oh man, the chief's finally going to win. Nope, he's going to lose again. And he goes, he used to piss off the audience. And it's like, no, we need to go through that emotional ringer of, oh, our favorite person just got screwed. That sucks. And you feel for them. And then as much as we want the couple that we know should be together, we need that friction. We need them not, connecting in a certain way to build that anticipation. And then sadly, I mean, I can name a million TV shows where it was, will they or won't they, as far as a romantic bet, that when they finally put them together, it's like, the show's boring now. All right, never mind. I mean, I Dream of Jeannie, one of the most ridiculous examples, but when they finally got married, it's like, yeah, it's not fun anymore. Or Moonlighting from the 80s, Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis. And, oh, I really hope Dave and Maddie finally get together. And they do. And it's like, all right, now it's kind of boring. Yeah, I don't know. That part of the sexual tension wasn't there anymore. And again, it does kind of dovetail with the hero's journey as well. We need these people to be put through their paces, because then we care about them more, and then we do root for them. And I've seen it a million times in comic stories that are 6 parts. And, in the first or second part, a character isn't acting like he normally does. Captain America, Hail Hydra, like I mentioned before. What are you doing to Steve Rogers? It's the beginning of the story. There are many chapters to come. Relax. Let the writer write his story. And then again, sometimes it does fail. As I mentioned, Frankencastle with the Punisher example, or Fraction's Fear Itself Marvel event. I mean, there are times when the story doesn't connect. Good news is, relax, there's going to be another story. I always say that about the movies that fail. And when Batman and Robin, the Arnold movie with Clooney and everything, and how ridiculous that movie was. Well, that does it for Batman movies. Relax. And even back then, it took a couple of years before they tried again. And now when a movie fails, I'm like, if they really believe in this character, they are 2 years away, because it obviously takes at least a year and change to make a new movie. They're one movie away from fixing it. Just relax. And I could say that about Sony's misfires with the Spider-Man villain movies that they've tried to make over the years. And it's like, don't worry. One good movie. And I mean, again, Netflix Daredevil. Or rather, the new Disney Plus Daredevil that's coming out. It's like, oh my God, I haven't been this excited about a Marvel Disney show forever. Well, here we are. Again, you got to be patient.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case study with Daredevil, because they had a good portion of that, if not like 50% at least of the show in the bag. And they went back and redid it all from the beginning, because I think lockdown was a factor, but then they received some feedback, which, it's interesting. The audience, this is something I discuss often with students, and like I can't give an answer, because I don't think it's in anyone's position, one person, to give an answer to such a question. But it's like when you create something, a story, a piece of art, whatever it is, and you put it out into the world, it's yours, but it's also now every, because you want them to participate. That's what gives it its longevity. This is why these, characters and stories we love. And this is why we keep listening to the same stories again and again. People are like, not another reboot, not this. Yeah, Hercules is still around today, we still know who that is because of the interpretation, reinterpretation of it. And just when you put out, but Daredevil was a good example. Sonic, of course, which is doing gangbusters in the box office still, and it's third in a trilogy, which is usually unheard of, is doing quite well. And this is stuff that the audience responded to. And sometimes people get emboldened by actually saying, well, you see the negative side to it. Like, there's no rule book with this. I suppose it's just when it comes towards art, the main thing is once it makes us feel something, at least that's an incredible thing, because as of recording Free Sky, we're the only ones who can say that, like, we create something not because it, we have to, we're not compelled to, in the sense that we don't, we fall off the face of the earth, but we do it because it inspires, it uplifts, it entertains, smiles. It's a form of affection to say, I drew this for you and stuff. And that's the element to it that sometimes, I think with the internet, we get more emboldened behind the screen to say things that, you wouldn't in the street. Imagine talking the way you do online to someone and say, oh, but
Well, like you said, when you have a guest on and you know why you suck, it's like, no, don't do that, man. You're not going to do that. Come on. And also, I agree with the writers who tell me, you want to give the audience not necessarily only what they want, because a lot of times they want the tropes. And I always use the Superman shorthand of the old George Reeves 50s television show of Superman crashes through the wall. The gangsters have Lois tied up with a gag. He stands there. They bounce bullets off his chest. They throw the gun at him. He clunks their heads, gets them unconscious. He unties Lois, and they fly away. That's every Superman story. Fine. But it is the intricacies of, wait a minute, let's put a little, here's red kryptonite. Now what's he going to do? You got to put obstacles in there and surprise the audience with who have perceived notions and expectations and subvert them, at least temporarily, to put your characters in jeopardy and go, oh my God, well, now what's going to happen? Wait a minute. I don't know what to think of. And I hope my fears are wrong about Captain America, Brave New World. Because again, as you said, they've reshot. And I do think there is value to a test audience and figuring things out. And also, again, perhaps correcting some of these initial, again, forgive the shorthand of DEI, where, okay, this is great, problem solved. It's like, not necessarily. Let's see what the audience says, and let's see what they're looking for here. I think Anthony Mackie's a fantastic actor, and I've loved his portrayal as the Falcon, and I love the Falcon and Winter Soldier as this next chapter after Endgame. I think I need an explanation in the movie that his new suit is strong enough to withstand an attack from the Red Hulk. Because, some of the best Captain America stories were after Steve was in the ice and other people would try to be Captain America who didn't have the powers. And it's like, yeah, that's just a suit, man. And now if you're going up against, an immortal, God, the worst example was Suicide Squad with Harley Quinn and her bat facing this immortal bad woman. And it's like, what the hell is she going to do with the bat? This is a god that she's up against. This is ridiculous. That's stupid. Give me a break. So yeah, but I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that whatever editing they've done and reshoots result in a good movie. I always try to be optimistic. As much as I get upset with even Star Trek, every week I'm like, well, maybe I'll like this episode better. So, and sometimes I do.
I always bring it back to Donna and verisimilitude, which is like, we know, like, we suspend our disbelief, but you have to have the parameters in which the rules take place, because when you start doing that, then it ruins the immersion that you have with the audience. And then it kind of gets a little muddled then, because you're like, oh, well, if you just make that leap and like Deus Ex Machina kind of resolution at the end, it does dilute a little bit of what was at stake and what the story was. So like I always like verisimilitude. That was the one, Donna. I always drop that into my narrative classes to see who's ever heard of this, and then I'm like, okay, let's do a class in 1978 Superman to take you on to why this works. But I always joke with the with Dark Knight trilogy that Nolan did, that many people thought maybe the end wasn't as strong as the other two, and obviously they had to make some changes with the untimely passing of Heath Ledger. But then I often just turn around and say to them, at what point with the rich guy in the bat mask did you stop suspending your disbelief? Was it when they started breaking the laws of physics, the atomic bomb? I'm pretty sure that's why Nolan made Oppenheimer. Was like, that's it. I showed them all I know physics.
What I loved about Nolan's Batman movies, and I love this in general, and in fact, Wade and I were talking about this because he's doing Batman and Robin Year One. Alfred is so important to Batman because there are very few people that, and he does it, with his standard English butler demeanor, but hey, you're screwing up, and I'm the only guy that can really tell you that. And even, it is still employer-employee, and he does always do, and there's a great moment in Mark's comic where he feels Bruce is neglecting Dick as Dick Grayson and not really paying attention to how he is, because this is really the early years when he's first in Wayne Manor. And he's like, hey, I don't care what he's doing on patrol. The kid is screwing up as a kid. You got to do something about it. It's like, wow, you never talked to me like this before. but he's listening. And while it's been interesting from a story standpoint in modern, the current DC timeline, that Alfred is still dead in that way that Uncle Ben is still dead right now in Spider-Man and Bucky was for decades. It's like we need those common people. Lois fulfills that role in Superman, and especially even more once she learned the identity and once they were married. Clark, you're screwing up. And it's like, all right, I'm listening. I trust you. And we need that Greek chorus of regular people to get into the hero's face. Foggy Nelson with Daredevil. Matt, you're losing yourself, man. You're forgetting why you started doing this, and you're just out on a rampage. You got to relax. You got to take a step back. We need those people. We need those people in our lives. I mean, and again, that's the human connection that we can relate to, of having a surrogate father like Alfred, or a spouse, or a best friend who can really tell you, I know you, and you're not doing it right, and I need you to step back and think about it. I know how powerful you are, but you're also a person, and you're screwing up in the person category.
I would love to be a fly in the wall to know what was the decision behind that, because I remember listening to, again, Tom King in your podcast, where it was like, that wasn't his decision. It was a different regime because AT&T and all were involved, but it's just like, it's so interesting. But that said, when Tinian took over with his run, so we're going to do, and again, the interview you did with Dan DiDio about what was post 5G, I remember listening to that because Dan just kind of dropped what it was, and I was like, this is amazing. We're going to have like a Charles Magneto dynamic between John and Damien. I'm like, what? This sounds brilliant. But yeah, it's curious. But then that said, it's in the Batman comics been curious to see the evolution of Jim Gordon, because he's currently no longer the commissioner, but his relationship with Bruce has evolved. But he still doesn't want to know who Batman is, but he is kind of evolving more into the mentor father figure. And then the Absolute Batman comic, I think, has been the best use of Alfred in years, because it kind of made the most modern sense of what a modern Alfred could be, because I don't even know if butlers even exist anymore in this day. But an ex-British military, that makes sense. Okay, I get behind that. And then I suppose, John, for yourself, I've spoken at length about Word Balloon, but Word Balloon's also kind of like, at this stage, it's a channel, but also a network. You have the Oh Yeah podcast that you do as well with the guys, Big Bout podcast as well, and then you've also have Trek Talk as well, or Trek Watch as well, with the guys. Do you have much other projects on the line for yourself? I know you were looking at some audio documentaries as well, that in the past, and you put up a great one as well with the Dempsey Dunny on Big Bout, I think it was. That was really interesting.
Oh, thanks, man.
And you got some great interviews, because this is what brilliant about Word Balloon is, in the 21st century, starting from today, if you want a record or something, or recording, you'll have it, whether you want it or not. In some cases, we're all being surveilled by some method. But
yes,
you have a great repository of content there with people who are like sadly no longer with us, but you had conversation with them. You got some really insightful stuff, like in comics, Neil Adams, for example, the conversations you had were really insightful, not just from his experience, the creator fighting for the rights of the Superman creator, Siegel and Schuster, but then also his own opinions on science and such. It was really interesting to see that side of the creator. So what's your hopes or plans then with Word Balloon coming in? We're still just starting off 2025, I suppose, but what would you like to do? Is there another series you would like to do in the vein of, Trek Watch, or is there perhaps taking it to other platforms? Like you mentioned the possibility, like other shows that you could take to other networks as well. Anything in the cards?
Well, as far as documentaries, I'm kind of keeping my powder dry, because I know right now all the company, that is something I would not just want to put out to put it out. I think one documentary thing that I do already have a lot of assets for, I don't want to do it for free. And I'd like to at least get, if not putting it on a network and get a bigger audience, get sponsors to believe in it as well, and truly get some upfront money for it. So I'm like I said, I'm just kind of keeping that in reserve. And also, initially I do, and I still have the old feeds where the Oh Yeah podcast, which was me, Art Baltazar, and Franco, the Tiny Titans creators, and that's just messing around, just having fun. That's kind of our casual conversation podcast. Trek Talk has evolved into, and in fact, we're going to do an episode Sunday night where we're going to mention the Section 31 movie coming up. Still hasn't aired here in the States, but more so, we're going to talk about Skeleton Crew from Star Wars and the What If animated series, the Daredevil trailer, a couple other things. And that's kind of my TV and movie watch conversational podcast. But I'm putting everything on Word Balloon because that is the biggest audience. And I don't want to pigeonhole myself. I know there's an American broadcaster, Keith Olbermann, who really established himself as a sportscaster and then took a shift and became a political pundit. And a lot of people are like, hey, stick to sports. What do you know? Shut up. And the guy's a very smart guy, and he does his research. I respect his opinion, and I don't want people to just think of me as the comic book guy. I'm not ashamed of it at all, obviously, 20 years doing it. But like I just had, and I'm hoping the Three Stooges have traveled beyond our shores.
I heard it as well, yeah. I saw that was great. That was really
yeah. The guy who I for people who may not know, I just interviewed a guy who wrote a biography of one of the brothers, one of the original Three Stooges, Shemp, who is usually designated as the fourth Stooge, but actually pre-movies in vaudeville, he was one of the original three, and then he stepped away, had his own film career when they brought Curly in, and then when Curly passed away, he rejoined the team to help his brother out, essentially. So that was fun. But yeah, I mean, and also, given my age and given my perspective and my love of old 20th century pop culture, I kind of want room for that in Word Balloon. And I want people to think beyond the comic book and nerd sphere, that there are these other areas. I mean, my friend Gabe Hardman and I and Ian, have all done watches of movies and done our opinions, done reviews of old movies and things. And again, because I really believe that there is this younger generation that just isn't aware of some of the great stuff that happened before 1980. I love that line in Civil War when Spider-Man goes, remember that really old movie, The Empire Strikes Back? And we're all like, yeah, thanks, Spidey, fantastic. But it's true. And again, that's okay. There's a lot more entertainment options for younger people. I mean, my God, they are served from, the Teletubby age. I don't know if anyone's watching that anymore. Bluey and some of these other kids shows to, their tween years and into their 20s. So yeah, they've been served in a way that we never were when we were kids. So they don't have to watch black and white movies with their grandparents and go, oh yeah, that's Basil Rathbone. He was a hell of a Sherlock Holmes. And, it's like, hey, those are good Sherlock Holmes stories. That's cool. Things like that. So Jeremy Brett, shout out to Jeremy Brett, the best on film Holmes there ever was. But so no, I think there's, and also as I get older, I think my age group is not as well served as younger demographics are with online entertainment. So as they are getting more and more savvy with how to connect and watch a video or listen to a podcast, it's like, don't worry, I got your entertainment covered. I've got subjects that you know and you love that you would want to hear more about the career of Shemp Howard from the Stooges or Dean Martin or Jerry Lewis or some of these other people.
Yeah, I recently, I think it was around Halloween, you did the great episode of the Countdown of Radio, the old radio show. And you get little snippets, and I was like, this is really interesting. And, some of it was on YouTube. I popped into Audible, and actually Audible had the full episodes. So I was looking like X-1 and such, and I was like, this is great. And like it really holds up. Anyone listening, just check out, these are old radio shows. From the 50s, some even old in some cases. X-1 is CBS produced. But when you listen to it, it holds up today as if it was a modern show. Like some of the concepts I was really impressed. So like, this is kind of the fiction we're getting served in certain entertainment today. Sometimes we think, oh, this is a 21st century idea, 20th century idea. It's like, no, people have been messing around. I'm just getting around to some Jules Verne stuff now. Finally, I'm like, wow, this
is great.
It was really ahead of the curve. He was. It's like, this is
not yet. I did a documentary series called Prophets of Science Fiction. I was one of the talking heads, and I was so good. They're like, hey, we want you to do the Jules Verne episode. I'm like, fantastic, because that guy does not get enough credit for his ideas in that steampunk era, that pre-technological era, and he was thinking about these things. He set From the Earth to the Moon in around, like, well, if we're going to do moon landing or moon shots, it probably needs to be like near the equator, and like Florida would be a good place. And meanwhile, 100 years later, NASA puts Cape Canaveral in Florida because from a trajectory standpoint, that's where you want to do the moon shot from. And the same with Texas, with Houston and stuff, the southern part of the United States. So no, it's those kind of things that absolutely make sense. And as far as I always say it's a shame about old time radio, which was from the 20s till the early 1960s. And it was really a shame because with the advent of television, a lot of the great creatives shifted to television. And it was a shame because really in the early 50s and into the mid 50s, radio was really starting to, flex its muscles. And you got really, for its time, sophisticated shows that really used sound effects well. The radio Gunsmoke, which, by the way, it's great that you looked on Audible. Go to the Internet Archive, archive.org. Hundreds of great radio shows there from the golden age and stuff. And now, actually, and I just had Kyle Higgins on talking about an audiobook adaptation he's doing of Radiant Black, but also my friend Rob Burnett, who just made a noir that's based on a Max Allan Collins story that's set in the 1930s. I mean, as you know, teaching it, audio engineering and mixing has gotten so advanced. There is nothing more immersive than putting your earbuds in, closing your eyes, and entering this theater of the mind that only audio can produce, and let your imagination tell the visuals. And I think it's incredible. And again, we have really good actors, we have really good writers, and we're getting, just as good of a product today with the advantations. Here's a free word for everybody that doesn't exist. The advantages of today's technology of layering sound effects and music along with acting and making it a much more immersive experience.
Brilliant. And just before we wrap up, I just want to also show to we have a couple of students here who are very fair play to them, are joining just before we even begin the new semester. So fair play, I appreciate it. But just if there's any questions they want to come in, now's the chance.
Good.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead. That's what.
Sort of I know it phrases in a way that it isn't just sort of a redundant question, but so I've been, like, I used to have a podcast, or I didn't, I wasn't the host now, I was just an ongoing. We had a podcast that is no longer hosted on the internet. There's only, out of the 100 episodes we did, I've only ever been able to find maybe one or they were sort of put in a couple of different spots. They were hosted in different locations. It used to be iTunes because we're just not going to pay for it, etc. But I was talking to seeing each other in a long time, and our podcast on premise, it was actual citizens. The idea from the outset was that almost every on that podcast would eventually be outdated as far as its sentiment, and times will change. And I'm wondering, because you've been, like, podcasting used to be a very niche thing. I think it was only Ricky Gervais and maybe some other, in any way, actually monetarily successful doing it back when they started. But contingency to keep Word Balloon in the historical record be accessible 1,000 years from now if the internet just isn't going to do. What if wherever you have it hosted now, any company that becomes public, it's exponential growth, not archiving. So I'm wondering, how have you thought about this? Like, how are you going to have it so that Word Balloon is an accessible historical document then in a society that may look radically different from ours now, years from now? Is it something that's ever come up, or?
Thanks for that, Alistair. So you were cutting in and out there, Alistair, just to give you the heads up. But we got it. We got the question. I was going to put you back on mute, okay? And go back to John then. I'll just make a note of that for the recording, that I think there's a signal delay, but I think John caught that anyway.
Yeah, I caught the gist of it. No, and I appreciate that, Alistair. And it's a really nice compliment to refer to Word Balloon as this resource of what comics were at the moment. And really, that was the ambition of the show, to even look back. And occasionally I will bring up old episodes to say, look at where we were, my first conversation with Brian Bendis in 2005 compared to where we are now, things like that. And as you said, how the business has changed. As far as like establishing any sort of repository, I have talked to some schools that are interested, which is very nice. I haven't made that hard plan, but I do have hard copies of my interviews that, God forbid, something were to happen, that, that stuff will endure beyond whatever iteration my current network is. And also, I do put my show, my personal network is Spreaker, which has become a division. I don't even know if it's global, but iHeartRadio bought Spreaker, and Spreaker was an Italian company. They bought the assets from a company called Blog Talk Radio, who I made my initial deal with, and then they got bought by Spreaker. Spreaker got bought by iHeart. But I'm on iTunes. I was on Google Talk. I try to be on every podcast platform that's out there, and that they get my feed. But you're right. We don't know what's going to happen. I mean, or even, one of these crazy bombs that could take down the, internet grid and the electrical grid. So, no, you're right about that. But no, I do think about that, and I would like to. I haven't settled on a school, but I would hope, much like some of the writers that have had their papers donated to a university or something, I would like that possibility for Word Balloon, because I do think there is value in these interviews and where these creators were at that moment of the conversation. And I do think that is something that future generations can learn from. As, Owen kindly pointed out, some of the creators that did grow up listening to me, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and are still listening, and now they're professionals.
I look forward to when we get like the Kryptonian crystals where we can put in so Word Balloon.
My son, here on the planet Krypton. I love the way Brando said Krypton. As well, yeah. I know. I can correct Marlon Brando. Good luck with that. Absolutely, man.
I can't wait to see the Billy Zane film. He's doing the biopic. Have you seen it? Or not biopic. It's about the island that Marlon Brando bought. And Billy Zane looks amazing. I'm so jealous of Terrific Con because he's going to be there. But it's the same time it's Dublin Comic Con. I said, that would have been great.
Oh, is it the same time? That's too bad, man.
Otherwise, I'll be there. Hook, line, and sinker. I couldn't miss that.
I know. I can't wait to meet Billy Zane. And, that poor Phantom movie, I feel this way about Alec Baldwin's Shadow movie as well. There are elements in it that absolutely work, and then there are elements that don't. And it's too bad because, again, that's when the comic book movies were kind of, or I should say the superhero movies, were kind of finding their footing and still kind of going through their growing pains and stuff. And that's why, like I say, I really feel like the Blade movie was kind of the first step in the right direction. And then certainly the X-Men movies did well, the Spider-Man movies did well. But then when Marvel was in that position to make Iron Man, it's like, okay, now we know what we're doing. And again, I do have faith that mojo will come back tomorrow.
No, awesome. And then just before we close out, any other questions in the floor? In that case, then, also.
Oh, wait, Alistair, I think you want to ask something.
Yeah, one last question. Now, I haven't listened because obviously Word Balloon has a lot of episodes. So I'd be very interested to get a particular comic book, and I'm buy it probably in the next few weeks. But there's one called My Favorite Thing Is by Emil Ferris, and Emil Ferris put comic book at the age of 50, and it kind of it seems to have made a couple of. What if this creator have you interviewed her?
I don't know, and I got enough of that. You're asking me about Emil Ferris, who she's and she's actually a Chicagoan, and I did interview her. She contributed to a pro voting comic book that this guy Craig Yo put out, and that was my only on the record conversation with Emil. We've been trying to connect for a while, and she's had a few, just nothing dramatic, but just like, hey, I'm really sorry, I'm kind of messed up right now from a just real life standpoint, so it's not a good time yet. But I'm glad you mentioned her because I absolutely would love to talk to her. Sorry, I'm burping as I'm talking, but I would because I do appreciate her book. And as you said, to start writing comics in her middle age and stuff. But she's really great. And I have met her at conventions and like I said, had the one voting conversation with her that I did. But no, I would love to talk to her. And again, that shows you the difference between what mainstream people think of when they think of comic books, superhero stuff and everything. And it's like, no, she really metaphorically told a very personal story with her graphic novels. And yeah, she's pretty cool. She's really cool. And so I that's good, Alistair. I appreciate you put the bug in my ear to get back on the stick. And that's the thing, man. Sometimes I'll be like, hey, you got to come on Word Balloon. And so it's like, yeah, you asked me 2 years ago and I'm still waiting. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I have. Jesus. Because I try to do a lot of shows because I want people, I almost think of Word Balloon as almost like a comic book magazine where it's like, okay, if you don't like this episode, you're going to like the next one and you won't have to wait that long. Because I know people do it weekly and sometimes even less frequently and stuff. And also I really enjoy doing. I mean, to me, it really, and also that we have this opportunity to provide this kind of adjacent entertainment to comics that wasn't there before. So at least, again, I think I do a good job of getting all kinds of people and people with different backgrounds and orientations. And I do make an effort to make sure that, women and other creators of color beyond us, white guys that are out there making books and stuff. And it's like, no, everybody has an interesting story. Rob V, the fantastic writer from Mumbai. My God, he is just so good. And his ideas. And again, we get these people from different backgrounds that are coming in and not only writing superhero stories, but also writing their own, create their own stories and stuff. And it's like, oh, thank God there's a new voice and this person has a different perspective. I always say that about a lot of the UK people that I talk to when they get the chance to work on American heroes. And it's like, you're coming, like I always said this to James Robinson in particular, and Mark Miller and Grant and Morrison and people like that. It's like your perspective on these American heroes that I think some of us, having grown up on this stuff, take for granted in a very America-centric way. These other creators have much different views. And Emile Ferris is a great, great creator. And again, really has stuck with her own story and metaphorically putting it in her graphic novels. No, she's really a unique voice. And some of that needs to be heard and more people need to be aware of her. Abigail, was this interesting? I feel bad and it's okay that you don't have questions. I'm not trying to pressure you at all, but I hope this was helpful and useful in some way.
Listen to the two of you chat for nearly 2 hours. It's been really insightful to hear how much you've worked on this over the past 20 years. I'll just give a round of applause. Well, the fact that you've done this for 20 years is amazing.
Thank you. That really means a lot, truly. Thank you. Because again, what I that's a great thing about podcasting. It's a niche thing and you can have a niche subject. I mean, I have a friend who does a crocheting video podcast and it's like, that's great. And again, I'm never going to watch it, but it's like good that you're doing it. And I know there's a community out there that loves it, what she's doing and everything. That's wonderful. So no, and I hope there was enough of the basics of what we discussed that was informative for you.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much.
Owen knows too, if anyone wants to get a hold of me and has questions beyond our conversation, john@wordballoon.com. And I say that to listeners all the time. Please, I welcome your feedback. I welcome your questions. I am not afraid of competition. When it's I want to do a comic book podcast. I hope that's okay. Of course it's okay. Who am I? Are you nuts? I'm like, yeah, man. I mean, again, everybody has a different point of view that they bring to their podcasting. And their line of questioning is going to be unique of what I may ask. And that's great. And it only adds to the, general conversation to have those other voices and stuff. So I know other podcasts are like, I was here first. It's like, relax. Jesus, get a grip, man. It's not proprietary. It's, anybody can do this. And we're living examples of literally anyone can do this.
Now, I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. Again, if you do have the chance, check out the Word Balloon podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also support John's podcast, Word Balloon, via the Patreon page. If you go to Patreon, you'll be able to support. Essentially, if you find what John does, which is essentially an audio magazine for the comic book medium, If you enjoy what he does, could you spare the cost of a comic once a month? It's definitely worthwhile in terms of the content that you receive. Thanks again to everyone for coming out and supporting this podcast, Creator in Conversation. Again, if you can, please like and share. You can comment on the Spotify page as well. Comments are all welcome. We'd love to hear from you as well. You can also email us directly at info@tasqart.com. That's TASQART.com. And be sure to check out what we have on the horizon coming up as well. We've lots of in the way of comic strips, which we do weekly, with Tala Echo, which you can purchase as well directly from our web store. And you can also inquire about our upcoming classes, masterclasses, talks, and if you're interested, participate in a live recording of Creator in Conversation, both on our campus at the Edge Dublin or via Zoom in some cases as well. This has been a copyright production of Macaulay Consultancy 2025.